The silence in Lawrence's office didn't just hang there. It felt heavy, like the humidity before a Florida hurricane. It was the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat thumping against your ribs. I sat in a high-back leather chair that had seen better decades, staring at a man who had been my attorney and friend for 15 years. Lawrence wouldn't look at me. He was busy adjusting a stack of papers on his mahogany desk, his fingers trembling just enough to make the edges rustle. Outside, the evening traffic on Gulf Boulevard was a dull hum, a reminder that the world was still turning, even as mine was about to tilt off its axis. "Milton," Lawrence finally said, his voice cracking like dry timber. "I've spent the last 48 hours trying to find a way to tell you this that won't break your heart. But there isn't one. There's just the truth, and the truth is ugly." He pushed a smartphone across the desk toward me. On the screen was a series of screenshots, text messages. I recognized the contact name immediately. David, my son, my only child. My throat tightened as I scrolled. The words were clinical, cold, and calculated. They talked about me like I was a piece of aging machinery that had become too expensive to maintain. "The guardianship petition is ready," one message read. "Dr. Curtis will sign off on the cognitive assessment for $15,000. We should have everything filed by mid-April." I felt a chill settle into my marrow, the kind that no amount of Florida sun can burn off. I've lived 67 years on this earth. I've seen combat in the Marines, built a successful business from the dirt up, and buried a wife I loved more than life itself. I thought I knew what pain felt like. I was wrong. This was a new kind of agony, the realization that the person you die for is currently measuring you for a coffin while you're still breathing. "Who is Dr. Curtis?" I asked. My voice sounded steady, a habit from my time in the service, but inside, I was crumbling. "A psychiatrist," Lawrence said, finally meeting my eyes. His expression was a mix of pity and professional rage, but not the kind you go to for help. "He's a mercenary, Milton. He's known in certain legal circles as a signature for hire. Dennis Fowler, the attorney your son just retained, uses him for elder cases. They find wealthy seniors, fabricate a narrative of mental decline, and then move in for the kill. It's a legal kidnapping, Milton. They call it protective guardianship. But it's just a way to liquidate a life's work without the owner's consent." I leaned back, the leather creaking under my weight. My mind flashed back to 3 nights ago, my 67th birthday. It had been a perfect evening, or so I thought. David had insisted on taking me to Harbor Lights, that upscale seafood spot on Mandalay Avenue where the tourists go to feel fancy. The Malbec had been expensive, the grouper was fresh, and the sunset over the Gulf had painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. I could still see David sitting across from me, looking every bit the successful car salesman in his tailored suit. Beside him was Jessica, his wife, who spent most of the meal adjusting her lighting and taking photos of her appetizers for her Instagram followers. And then there was little Chloe, my 6-year-old granddaughter, the light of my life, who was busy coloring a picture of a house on her placemat. "To Dad," David had said, raising his glass. 67 years young, and still sharper than a tack. "We're so lucky to have you around, Pop." Jessica had reached across the table and patted my hand, her smile perfect and practiced. "We really are, Milton. We worry about you all alone in that big house on Sunset Drive, you know? We just want to make sure you're taken care of." I had felt a swell of pride that night. I'd told them, right there over the key lime pie, that I was planning to update my will. I told them I wanted to make sure everything I'd built, the house, the investments from the sale of my daycare business, the nearly $3 million I'd squirreled away, would go to them. I wanted to see them secure. I wanted Chloe to have every advantage. David had hugged me so hard I could feel his heart beating, or maybe it was just his pulse quickening at the thought of the money. Now, sitting in Lawrence's office, that memory tasted like ash. It wasn't love, it was an audition. They were checking to see if I was still all there, and when they realized I was, they decided they couldn't wait for nature to take its course. They were going to manufacture my decline. "How did you get these?" I asked, gesturing to the phone. "My paralegal, Linda," Lawrence explained. "She used to work for Dennis Fowler. He's a sloppy man, Milton. Arrogant. He was at Brew Theory coffee shop last week, bragging to a colleague about a $400,000 commission on a new guardianship case. He left his phone on the table to grab a refill. Linda saw your son's name on the screen. She knew I'd been your attorney for years. She took the photos because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't." Lawrence pulled a thick manila folder from his drawer and dropped it on the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. This is a draft of the petition they're preparing to file. They're claiming you have advanced dementia. They've documented incidents of you forgetting to turn off the stove, getting lost in your own neighborhood, and making irrational financial decisions. They're painting a picture of a man who is a danger to himself. I've never forgotten the stove in my life, I snapped, the Marine in me starting to wake up. I run 5 miles every morning. I balance my own books. I'm sharper than David has ever been. It doesn't matter what's true, Lawrence said softly. It matters what they can convince a judge is true. With a signed assessment from a doctor and sworn testimony from your own flesh and blood, a judge will sign an emergency order before you even know there's a hearing. Once that happens, they have total control. They'll move you into a care facility. I've already found the one they're looking at. Sunshine Senior Living. And then they'll start selling off your assets to pay for your care. By the time we could fight it, the house would be sold, the accounts would be drained, and you'd be a prisoner in a semi-private room on a heavy dose of sedatives. I stood up and walked to the window. The palm trees were swaying in the breeze, looking so peaceful. It was hard to reconcile the beauty of the evening with the horror of what I was hearing. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike at Clearwater Beach, the kid I'd supported through every failed business venture and bad decision, wanted to erase me. He didn't want me dead. He just wanted me out of the way so he could play with my checkbook. I thought about his BMW Bay series, the designer bags Jessica carried, the private school tuition for Chloe that they were always 2 months late on. I'd been helping them, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough for people who measured their worth in likes and leather upholstery. What do? I asked, my back still to Lawrence. Right now? Nothing, Lawrence said. I turned, surprised. If you confront them, they'll just speed up the timeline. They'll claim your outburst is further proof of your instability. We need to play this smart, Milton. We need to build a fortress around you before they even realize you've seen the siege engines. I'm not going to sit here and let them do this, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You're not going to sit, you're going to act, Lawrence corrected. But you have to be an actor. You have to go home, you have to answer their calls, and you have to be the confused old man they think you are. Let them think their plan is working. Let them get comfortable. While they're planning your funeral, we're going to be planning their downfall. The drive home to Sunset Drive was a blur. I pulled into my driveway and stared at the house. It was a beautiful ranch-style home, meticulously maintained. I'd spent 30 years making it perfect. Now, it felt like a target. As I walked through the front door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the caller ID, David. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands. I thought about the text messages. I thought about the $15,000 doctor. I thought about the semi-private room at Sunshine Senior Living. I hit the green button. Hey, son, I said, forcing a warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. Hey, Pop, just checking in, David said. He sounded so cheerful, so loving. Jessica and I were talking. We noticed you seemed a little tired at dinner the other night. A little forgetful, maybe. We were thinking about stopping by tomorrow afternoon. We want to help you go through some of those old files in your office. Clear out the clutter, you know? Make things easier for you. My grip tightened on the phone. They wanted into my office. They wanted to catalog the assets they were about to steal. They were moving faster than Lawrence thought. That sounds real nice, David, I said, my voice trailing off slightly, feigning a touch of weariness. I have been feeling a bit foggy lately. Maybe it's just the age catching up to me. Don't you worry about a thing, Pop. We're going to take care of everything. See you at 3? See you at 3, son. I hung up and leaned against the kitchen counter. My eyes fell on a framed photo on the wall, David's high school graduation. We both looked so happy. I wanted to reach into that photo and warn that younger version of myself. Don't give him everything. He won't appreciate it. He'll just want more. I went into my office and looked at the safe in the corner. Inside were the deeds, the bonds, the life I had built. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my soul. If I let them do this, if I let them win, then everything I believed about family and loyalty was a lie. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, watching the clock tick toward 3 p.m. I knew I had to be perfect. One slip-up, one moment of clarity that seemed too sharp, and they'd know I was onto them. The next afternoon, at exactly high, David's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. I watched them from behind the curtain, David, Jessica, and even Chloe. They were using my granddaughter as a shield, a way to keep me soft and unsuspecting. It was a low move, even for them. I opened the door before they could knock. I made sure to let my shoulders slump. I didn't wear my glasses, knowing it made me squint and look a bit more haggard. "Milton," Jessica chirped, stepping inside and handing me a casserole dish. "We brought dinner. Chicken tetrazzini, your favorite." I'd never liked chicken tetrazzini. In 40 years, I'd never once ordered it or asked for it. It was her favorite. "Thank you, dear," I mumbled, wandering toward the kitchen like I wasn't quite sure where I was going. That's very kind." I saw David exchange a quick, meaningful look with Jessica, a look that said, "See, he's worse than he was 3 days ago." "Why don't you sit with Chloe in the living room, Pop?" David said, patting my shoulder. "Jessica and I will just start tidying up the office for you. We don't want you straining yourself with all those heavy boxes." "The office?" I asked, blinking slowly. "Oh, right, the papers. There's a lot of them, isn't there?" "There sure are," David said, his eyes gleaming with a hunger he couldn't quite hide. I sat on the sofa and watched Chloe pull out her crayons. But my ears were tuned to the hallway. I heard the door to my office open. I heard the drawers sliding out. They weren't tidying. They were hunting. 10 minutes later, the house went silent. Then, I heard Jessica's voice, a sharp whisper that drifted through the vents. "David, look at this. The Vanguard statement. It's more than we thought. Nearly twice as much." "Keep looking," David whispered back. "We need the deed to the beach property. Fowler said we need proof of all real estate holdings for the emergency filing. If we get the judge to sign off Monday, we can have the locks changed by Friday." I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong I thought my heart might burst. Monday. They were filing on Monday. That gave me less than 72 hours. I looked down at Chloe. She was drawing a picture of me. She'd given me big, blue eyes and a crown. "You're the king, Grandpa," she whispered, smiling up at me. I stroked her hair, my heart breaking for the innocence she was about to lose. "Not a king, sweetheart," I whispered back. "Just a man who's tired of being hunted." I waited until they came back into the living room, both of them wearing masks of fake concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. They stayed for dinner, watching me pick at the tetrazzini like I was a child who forgot how to use a fork. They talked about the weather, about Chloe's school, about how peaceful it would be for me to live somewhere with full-time amenities. When they finally left, David hugged me again. "We'll be back on Monday to take you for a little checkup, Pop. Just a routine thing. Don't forget." "I won't forget, son," I said. As their taillights faded down the street, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed Lawrence's private number. He picked up on the first ring. "They're filing Monday," I said, my voice no longer trembling, no longer weary. The confused old man was gone. The Marine was back. "And they're looking for the beach property deed. They think they've got me cornered." "What do you want to do, Milton?" I looked at the empty hallway leading to my ransacked office. I thought about the son who had just hugged me while planning to steal my life. "I want to give them exactly what they want," I said. "I want them to think they've won. I want them to file that petition. I want them to walk into that courtroom on Monday morning thinking I'm a broken old man who can't remember his own name." "And then?" Lawrence asked. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked cold. He looked dangerous. "And then," I said, "I'm going to show them what happens when you try to bury a man who isn't dead yet." The house felt different after the taillights of David's Mercedes vanished into the humid Florida night. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a crime scene where the victim was still walking, talking, and cleaning the dishes. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the half-eaten tray of chicken tetrazzini, the smell of canned cream of mushroom soup and betrayal thick in the air. I realized then that my son hadn't just come over to check on me. He'd come to survey the land. He was a scout for an invading army, and I was the territory he intended to occupy. I didn't sleep that Saturday morning. Instead, I sat in my darkened office, the very room they had just ransacked under the guise of tidying up. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the chair I'd bought with the first real profit from Little Scholars Daycare back in Mutngin Chin Chum Chin Muitam, and I let the memories come. I needed to understand how we got here. I needed to find the exact moment my son's love for me had been replaced by a ledger. David had always been a shortcut kind of kid. When he was 10, he'd tried to sell his birthday presents to the neighbors to buy a motorized scooter. At 16, He'd borrowed $500 from my dresser to impress a girl, swearing he'd won it at a car wash fundraiser. Martha, my late wife, always told me I was too hard on him. "He just has a big imagination, Milton," she'd say, her eyes full of that soft, maternal grace that I never quite possessed. "He just wants to be a big man like his daddy." Martha had been the glue. When she passed away 4 years ago from a sudden, aggressive cancer, the glue dissolved. I saw David's grief, and for a while, I thought it had changed him. He was there for the funeral, held my hand while they lowered the casket into the sandy Florida soil. But even then, there were flickers of the old David. 2 weeks after the funeral, while I was still staring at Martha's empty closet, he asked me about her jewelry. Not for the sentimental value, but because Jessica needed something nice for a gala, and he wanted to know if the pearls were appraised. I should have seen the signs then. I should have realized that to David, everything was an asset waiting to be liquidated. The tension in the house was a physical thing now. I felt like I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside to prune the bougainvillea or check the mail, I saw the curtains twitch at the Henderson's house 3 doors down. Gerald Henderson was my neighbor, a retired judge who usually spent his days complaining about the heat, but lately, he'd been acting strange. He'd bring over bags of oranges and ask pointed questions about my routine. "You staying sharp, Milton?" he'd asked yesterday. His eyes narrowed behind thick bifocals. "Notice you've been leaving the porch light on during the day. David mentioned you might be getting a bit distracted." They were already poisoning the well. They were building a community of witnesses. If a retired judge says Milton Gray is losing it, who is a court to disagree? I didn't know it yet, but the psychological warfare was only beginning. On Sunday morning, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head and see if I was actually being followed. I drove my old Ford F-150 down to the marina, the smell of salt and diesel fuel always acting as a balm for my nerves. As I sat on a bench watching the charter boats head out, I saw a familiar silver Honda Accord pull into the lot. A man got out khakis, a blue polo, clipboard in hand. He didn't look like a private investigator. He looked like a bureaucrat. He spent 10 minutes taking photos of my truck. Then he walked toward the pier, pausing to watch me from a distance. My skin crawled. Lawrence had told me they were shopping for a doctor, but it felt like they were building a dossier. Every movement I made, the way I walked, the way I fumbled with my keys, the way I sat on a bench, was being cataloged as evidence of my decline. What happened next changed everything. I decided to stop playing the victim and start being the hunter. I waited until the man in the Honda drove off. Then I headed to a small, nondescript office building on Cleveland Street. I wasn't going to see Lawrence. I was going to see a man named Silas, a private investigator Lawrence had recommended off the record. Silas was a former cop with a face like a crumpled paper bag and a voice that sounded like gravel in a blender. "You're late, Milton," Silas grunted, tossing a folder onto his desk. "I've been digging into your son's finances. It's worse than the lawyer thought." I sat down, my heart hammering. How much worse? "David isn't just in debt. He's in the hole to people you don't want to owe money to," Silas said, leaning forward. "That BMW, he hasn't made a payment in 4 months. The bank is days away from a repo. But that's the small stuff. Jessica took out a $40,000 business loan last year for a cosmetic line that doesn't exist. She forged your signature as a co-signer, Milton." I felt the air leave the room. Forgery. My own daughter-in-law had committed a felony using my name. "And David?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What's his big debt?" Silas sighed. He tried to day trade his way out of his car payments, lost nearly $100,000 in crypto in 6 weeks. He's been skimming from the till at Prestige Motors, too. His boss, Rodriguez, is starting to notice discrepancies. David isn't just looking for a cushion, Milton. He's looking for a get-out-of-jail-free card. And you're the card. I walked out of that office feeling sick. My son wasn't just greedy. He was desperate, and desperate people are the most dangerous kind of predators. They don't have the luxury of mercy. Sunday night was the Last Supper. David called around 6. He sounded frantic, though he tried to mask it with that oily salesman charm. "Hey, Pop. Just wanted to remind you about tomorrow. The doctor's appointment is at 10. Dr. Curtis is a specialist. Real top-tier guy. He's going to help us get a baseline for your health. It's for the best, okay?" "I know, son," I said, leaning back in my chair and staring at a small, blinking light I'd noticed earlier that evening. It was tucked behind the books on my shelf, right next to the photo of Martha, a nanny cam. They'd planted a camera in my office during their cleanup on Friday. I'm looking forward to it. I want to make sure I'm handled correctly. That's my guy, David said, a palpable sense of relief in his voice. I love you, Pop. I love you too, David. I hung up and stared at the hidden camera. They were watching me right now. They wanted to see if I was confused. They wanted to see if I was scared. I didn't give them that satisfaction. I stood up, walked over to the bookshelf, and picked up the photo of Martha. I held it close to my chest, making sure the camera could see me. I let a single tear roll down my cheek, not for the man I was now, but for the son I had lost years ago. Then, I leaned in close to the hidden lens, my face a mask of perfectly faked bewilderment. Martha, I whispered, my voice trembling. Is that you? Why are you in the wall, Martha? I saw the tiny red light on the camera flicker. Somewhere, probably in their rented house on Palm Ridge, David and Jessica were watching. They were probably high-fiving. They had their proof. The old man was talking to the walls. He was gone. The money was practically in the bank. But as I turned away from the camera, the trembling in my voice vanished. My eyes went cold. I had played the role. I had given them the rope they needed to hang themselves. I spent the rest of the night in the basement. They didn't have a camera down there. I pulled out my old Marine trunk. I didn't reach for a weapon, at least, not the kind that fires bullets. I reached for a small, leather-bound ledger that I'd kept for 30 years. It contained every cent I'd ever given David, every loan for a failed business, every bailout, every down payment. It was a record of a lifetime of entitlement. Beside it sat a digital recorder Lawrence had given me. Carry it everywhere, he'd said. Florida is a two-party consent state for recording, but there are exceptions for documenting the commission of a crime, like fraud or elder abuse. I checked the battery. Full. I checked the memory. Empty. Tomorrow was Monday, the day they would file the petition, the day they would try to strip me of my name, my home, and my dignity. They thought they were walking into a courtroom to claim a prize. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. I sat on the floor of my basement, the cold concrete seeping through my jeans, and I began to write. Not a will, not a letter of love. I began to write the script for the most expensive mistake David Gray would ever make. Around I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. It wasn't the wind. This house was solid. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. I hadn't locked the back door. I'd left it open on purpose, wanting to see if they'd be bold enough to come back for one last reconnaissance mission. The footsteps were light, practiced. They moved through the kitchen, then toward the office. I stayed in the shadows of the basement stairs, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the hallway above. Did you find it? A voice whispered. Jessica. No, David hissed back. He must have moved the safe key. It's not in the desk. Check the bedroom. He's probably dead to the world. He was talking to the wall earlier, David. He's completely gone. Just get the key so we can have everything boxed up before the sheriff shows up tomorrow afternoon. The sheriff. They weren't just filing for guardianship. They were planning an immediate eviction. They were going to throw me out of my own house the moment the ink was dry. I gripped the railing of the stairs, my knuckles white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run up there and throw them out of my house, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to let the trap snap shut. Then, I heard David say something that made my blood run cold. Something that changed the game from a fight over money to a fight for survival. If he puts up a fight tomorrow, Jessica. Dr. Curtis said he can prescribe something fast-acting to keep him calm, a heavy sedative. He said once he's in the facility, it's easier if he's compliant. Just do what you have to do, she said. I can't live in this rental another month, David. My parents are asking questions. The credit card companies are calling 3 times a day. We need this over. They were going to drug me. They were going to chemical wash my brain just to make their paperwork easier. I waited until I heard the back door click shut and their car roll silently down the street with the lights off. I climbed the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. I walked into my office and looked at the photo of Martha again. I'm sorry, Martha, I whispered. This time I wasn't talking to the camera. I was talking to her. I'm going to have to break him. I don't have a choice anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed Silas. Change of plans, I said when he answered. I don't just want the financial records. I want the name of the nurse who works for Dr. Curtis, the one you said was disgruntled. I need her in Lawrence's office at Tam, man tomorrow. That's going to cost you, Milton, Silas said. I don't care about the cost, I snapped. I'm about to be declared incompetent. I might as well spend the money while I still legally own it. I hung up and went to the kitchen. I didn't make coffee. I just sat at the table and watched the sun begin to bleed over the horizon. The sky was a deep, angry red. At Cheen, David's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. He walked up to the door with a smile that would have fooled anyone who hadn't seen him lurking in the dark 5 hours ago. "Ready for your appointment, Pop?" he asked, as I opened the door. I really looked at him. I saw the greed in his eyes, the twitch in his jaw, the desperation in his hands. I felt a wave of sadness so profound it almost buckled my knees. But then, I remembered the word, sedative. "I'm ready, David," I said, leaning on a cane I'd bought yesterday just for the occasion. "Let's go see the doctor." As we walked to the car, I felt the digital recorder in my pocket. I felt the weight of the secrets I was carrying. And I felt the cold, hard certainty that by the time the sun went down today, only one of us would be going back to Sunset Drive. But as David pulled out of the driveway, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A black SUV was following us. It wasn't Silas. It wasn't Lawrence. I didn't know who it was, but as David turned toward the medical district, the SUV turned too. And that's when I realized that David wasn't the only one with a secret plan for this Monday morning. The black SUV stayed exactly 3 car lengths back as David navigated the morning traffic toward the medical district. I watched it in the side mirror, my heart doing a slow, steady thud against my ribs. In the Marines, they teach you about situational awareness. It becomes a part of your DNA. David, on the other hand, was too busy checking his reflection in the rearview mirror and adjusting his silk tie to notice he was being tailed. He was too consumed by the prospect of the kill to notice the other predators in the water. "You okay, Pop?" David asked, his voice dripping with a synthetic sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You've been staring at that mirror for 5 minutes. You're not seeing things again, are you?" There it was, the opening salvo of the morning's gaslighting. "Just the traffic, son," I mumbled, letting my lower lip tremble just a fraction. I stared out the window at the palm trees lining the road, looking for all the world like a man who wasn't quite sure what day it was. "Lot of cars today. Where are we going again? The park?" I saw David's knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. He exhaled a long, shaky breath, part frustration, part predatory excitement. "No, Pop, we talked about this. We're going to see Dr. Curtis. Just a little checkup, to help with the fogginess." "Right. The fogginess," I repeated. I felt the digital recorder in my pocket, its tiny red light, a secret beacon of truth, buried under my jacket. I thought about the black SUV. Was it Silas? Or was it someone else David had pissed off? Based on what Silas had told me about David's crypto debts and the skimming at the dealership, the list of people who wanted a piece of my son was getting longer by the hour. As we turned onto Belcher Road, I let my mind drift back to the summer David turned 24. I'd just retired from the daycare business, and I had high hopes for him. I'd given him $50,000 to start a landscaping company. I thought it would teach him the value of honest sweat. 6 months later, the money was gone. The equipment had been stolen without an insurance claim, and David was asking for another $20,000 to cover operating expenses. I'd given it to him because I saw Martha's eyes in his face, and I couldn't say no to her memory. I realize now that every check I wrote was just another brick in the wall he was building to trap me. I didn't help him. I subsidized his corruption. I'd been a good Marine and a good businessman, but I'd been a catastrophic father, and now I was paying the interest on 30 years of enabling. The medical building was a cold, glass and steel monolith that looked more like a bank than a place of healing. As David parked the Mercedes, the black SUV pulled into a spot across the lot. The driver didn't get out. I caught a glimpse of a dark window and a flash of a cell phone camera lens. Whoever they were documenting David's movements just as carefully as he was documenting mine. "Here we go," David said, his voice tight. He hopped out and ran around to open my door, playing the devoted son for the benefit of the security cameras. He grabbed my elbow, his grip a little too firm, and steered me toward the entrance. Inside, the lobby smelled of industrial lemon and anxiety. Jessica was already there, sitting in a designer chair that probably cost more than my first truck. She was wearing a somber navy dress, the kind people wear to funerals or high-stakes depositions. She stood up as we approached, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Milton," she whispered, leaning in to kiss my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and cold ambition. "How are you feeling this morning? You look a little pale." "I'm fine, Jessica," I said, letting my eyes wander aimlessly around the room. I forgot my hat. Did I bring my hat?" "It's okay, Milton," she said, sharing a smug look with David. "You don't need a hat in here." They checked me in at the front desk. I watched the receptionist, a tired-looking woman with heavy eyeliner, take my ID and insurance card. She didn't look at me like a person. She looked at me like a file. Behind her, a door opened, and a young nurse stepped out. She looked around the lobby, her eyes lingering on me for a second longer than necessary. She had dark circles under her eyes, and a nervous twitch in her hand. The disgruntled nurse, I thought. Silas's contact. "Mr. Gray," she called out. Her voice was thin, reedy. "Dr. Curtis is ready for you." David and Jessica both started to stand, but the nurse held up a hand. "Only the patient for the initial assessment, please. Family can join for the wrap-up." "We're his legal representatives," David snapped, his salesman charm slipping for a second. "We need to be in there." "Policy is policy," the nurse said, her voice gaining a sudden sharp edge. She looked directly at me. "Mr. Gray, if you'll just follow me." I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane. I felt David's eyes burning into the back of my head as I walked away. He didn't like losing control, not even for 20 minutes. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, the atmosphere changed instantly. The nurse didn't lead me to an exam room. She led me to a small supply closet near the back exit. "Mr. Gray," she whispered, her eyes darting to the door. "My name is Elena. Silas told me you were coming." I straightened my spine, the confused old man act vanishing in the blink of an eye. "You have the records?" "I have the audio," she said, pulling a thumb drive from her pocket. Her hands were shaking violently. "I recorded the meeting between Dr. Curtis and your son's attorney, Fowler. They talked about the $15,000 guarantee. Curtis agreed to diagnose you with stage bone Alzheimer's without even looking at your charts. He's already predated the report." My stomach did a slow roll. Stage bone. That would strip me of every right I had. I could be committed to a locked ward by the end of the week. "Why are you doing this, Elena?" I asked. "Because my mother was one of his assessments 2 years ago," she said, her voice cracking. "Fowler did the same thing to her. Stole her house in Dunedin, put her in a state-run facility where she died of a neglected UTI 3 months later. I took this job just to find a way to take them down. But I need someone with enough weight to make it stick. Someone who isn't a nurse with a grudge." "I have the weight," I said, taking the thumb drive. "And I have the best attorney in Clearwater. You're doing the right thing, Elena." "They're going to kill you, Milton," she whispered. "Maybe not with a gun, but they'll erase you. You need to get out of here." "Not yet," I said. "I need that predated report. I need the physical evidence of the fraud. Lead me to the exam room. Let's finish the play." She nodded, wiped her eyes, and led me to a sterile room at the end of the hall. A few minutes later, Dr. Curtis walked in. He was a man who looked like he spent a lot of money on his teeth and not much on his soul. He had a booming, false laugh and a handshake that felt like a wet fish. "Milton, good to see you," he said, clicking a pen over a clipboard. He didn't look at me. He looked at the pre-filled form in front of him. "David tells me you've been having a bit of a rough time lately. Forgetting things? Seeing people who aren't there?" I slumped back in the chair, my mouth slightly open. "Sometimes the walls, they move, doctor. And Martha, she's in the garden, but she won't come in for dinner." Curtis scribbled something on the paper. I caught a glimpse of the word hallucinations. I see. And what year is it, Milton?" 1974? I guessed, making sure to sound unsure. He smiled a cold, predatory expression. "Very good. Now, I'm just going to have you sign a couple of forms. Just administrative stuff so we can get you the help you need." He slid 2 papers across the table. I knew what they were without even reading them. A voluntary admission form for a psychiatric hold and a durable power of attorney, naming David as my sole guardian. If I signed these, the emergency hearing on Monday would be a mere formality. The trap would be shut, bolted, and welded. "My hand, it's a bit shaky, doctor," I whispered. "That's okay, Milton. Just a little X will do. Your son is right outside. He's going to take such good care of you." I picked up the pen. My heart was racing. I could hear the digital recorder in my pocket, capturing every word of this staged malpractice. I looked at the papers, then at Curtis. "Doctor?" I asked. "Yes, Milton. Does my son know about the black SUV following us?" The room went dead silent. Curtis froze, his pen hovering over the clipboard. He blinked, his professional mask flickering for a split second. "What are you talking about, Milton? There's no SUV." "Oh," I said, leaning in closer, my voice dropping to a low, cold whisper that made him flinch. "I think there is. And I think you should know that I'm not the only one who's been recording this conversation." I stood up, no longer leaning on the cane, no longer squinting. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time, I saw real fear in that man's face. He looked at my spine, straight as a spear, and realized he hadn't been dealing with a senile old man. He'd been dealing with a Marine who had spent 30 years running an empire. "I'm leaving now, Dr. Curtis," I said. "You're going to keep those papers. You're going to file your report, and then you're going to watch the news very carefully on Tuesday morning." I walked out of the exam room and down the hall. As I pushed open the double doors to the lobby, David and Jessica stood up, their faces full of expectant greed. "All done?" David asked, reaching for my arm. I brushed him off. I didn't say a word. I just walked straight out the front door and across the parking lot toward the black SUV. David and Jessica followed me, shouting, their voices rising in panic. "Pop, what are you doing? Milton, stop." I reached the SUV and tapped on the tinted window. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a cheap suit and a pair of sunglasses that didn't hide the scar running down his cheek. He wasn't Silas. He wasn't a cop. "Mr. Gray?" the man asked. "Who are you?" I demanded. "My name is Detective Miller," he said, showing me a badge from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. "We've been tracking Dr. Curtis and Dennis Fowler for 6 months. We were waiting for a lead on their next target." He looked past me at David, who had frozen 10 feet away, his face the color of bleached bone. "Your son's been very busy, Mr. Gray," Miller said. "But I didn't know it yet. He's not the one we're after, not primarily." He turned his gaze toward Jessica. She took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. "Mrs. Gray," Miller said, "we've been looking for the person who's been funneling David's skimmed money into an offshore account in the Caymans. It's funny, David thinks he's stealing from his father to pay his debts, but someone else has been taking that money right out from under him. Someone who's been planning to leave him the moment your father's estate was settled." I looked at Jessica. The mask was gone. In its place was a cold, calculating fury that made David look like an amateur. She didn't look at David. She didn't look at me. She looked at the detective. "I want a lawyer," she spat. The world seemed to explode in that parking lot. David started screaming at Jessica, calling her names I'd never heard him use. Detective Miller moved in to cuff her, and in the chaos, I saw something I'll never forget. David turned toward me, his eyes wide and wild. He didn't look like a man who was sorry. He didn't look like a son. He looked like a cornered animal. "You did this," he roared, lunging at me. "You're supposed to be crazy. You're supposed to be done." He never reached me. 2 plainclothes officers tackled him to the pavement, his expensive suit grinding into the gravel. I stood there, watching my son being pinned to the ground, and my daughter-in-law being read her rights. The Florida sun was beating down, hot and unforgiving. I felt the thumb drive in my pocket. I felt the weight of the betrayal. But as the police cruisers pulled into the lot, sirens screaming, I realized the most terrifying part of the whole day. Lawrence hadn't told me about the FDLE investigation. Silas hadn't mentioned it. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lawrence's office. "Lawrence, why didn't you tell me the state was already on Curtis?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Milton, I didn't tell you because I didn't know. The state doesn't move that fast on guardianship fraud." "Then who called them?" I asked. "I did," a voice said from behind me. I turned around. It was Gerald Henderson, my neighbor, the retired judge. He was standing by his car, holding a bag of oranges, a sad smile on his face. "I've known David was a snake since he was 12, Milton," Gerald said. "I wasn't going to let him do to you what he did to Martha's memory. But I didn't just call the police. I called someone else." "Who?" "The bank," Gerald said. "The one holding the mortgage on this medical building. Dr. Curtis is broke, Milton. He sold the building to an anonymous LLC last month to cover his legal fees." "Who owns the LLC, Gerald?" Gerald's smile widened. You do, Milton. Lawrence set it up yesterday. You're not just the patient anymore, you're the landlord, and you're about to evict every single one of them. I looked at the building, then at my son, then at the wreckage of my family. I had won. I had everything. So why did I feel like I was the one being hauled away in handcuffs? The sirens faded into the distance, but the silence that followed was even louder. I stood in that sterile parking lot, watching the exhaust fumes from the police cruisers dissipate into the humid air. I had won the first round. My building, my assets, my freedom, they were all technically intact. But as I looked at the gravel where my son's face had been pressed just moments ago, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a man who had just set fire to his own legacy to keep from freezing to death. I didn't know it yet, but the arrest was the easy part. The real nightmare, the part where the soul gets stripped bare, was only just beginning. In the state of Florida, especially with an attorney like Dennis Fowler involved, handcuffs are often just a temporary fashion accessory. David and Jessica were processed, booked, and back on the street before the sun had even fully dipped below the horizon. Jessica had tapped into that offshore account. Detective Miller mentioned money she'd been siphoning from David's skimming operation at the dealership. She'd posted bail for both of them with the cold efficiency of a woman paying a parking ticket. The first sign that the war was escalating came at 10 p.m. that night. I was sitting in my kitchen, a single lamp throwing long shadows across the linoleum, when my phone started blowing up. It wasn't calls, it was notifications. "Milton, have you seen this?" A text from Gerald read. I opened the link. It was a video posted to Jessica's Instagram, the one she'd supposedly shut down. It wasn't a shutdown. She'd just been scrubbing it for a relaunch. The video was titled, "The Truth About My Father-in-Law, A Cry for Help." It was a masterclass in manipulation. Jessica was sitting in a dimly lit room, her makeup smudged just enough to suggest she'd been crying for hours. She spoke in a hushed, trembling voice about how I'd been suffering in silence with severe PTSD and early-onset dementia. She described, with chilling detail, the hallucination I'd had at the doctor's office that morning. "He called the police on his own son," she sobbed into the camera. "He thought David was a stranger trying to hurt him. We tried to get him medical help, but he's become so paranoid, so violent. He's using his old military connections to harass us. We're terrified for our daughter's safety." The comments were a bloodbath, heartbreaking. These veterans need more support. Shame on him for using his status to hurt his family. Someone needs to step in before he hurts that little girl. By 10 p.m., the video had 10,000 views. By midnight, it was 50,000. Jessica hadn't just stolen my money. She was stealing my character, turning the very service I was proud of into a weapon against me. She was framing my self-defense as a mental breakdown. What happened the next morning changed the stakes from legal to personal. I went to the grocery store, the Publix on Island Way, where I'd shopped for 20 years. I needed milk, but what I got was a cold shoulder that froze me to the spot. I was at the deli counter when I saw Mrs. Higgins, a woman who had worked for me at the daycare for a decade. Usually, she'd give me a hug and ask about my joints. Today, she saw me, turned her cart around, and walked briskly in the opposite direction. I saw her whispering to another regular, her eyes darting toward me with a look of genuine fear. The humiliation wasn't a single event, it was a slow-motion drowning. Every person I passed looked at me like I was a ticking time bomb. The local hero from the 4th of July ceremony had been replaced by the violent, senile vet from Instagram. I went home and found a notice taped to my front door. It wasn't from the police. It was a temporary injunction for protection against domestic violence. David had filed it. The man who had tried to drug me and steal my house had convinced a night-duty judge that I was the threat. The terms were devastating. I was barred from coming within 500 feet of David, Jessica, or Chloe. My heart stopped. Chloe. They were using the one person I loved most in this world as a human shield. I couldn't see her. I couldn't call her. If she walked into a park where I was sitting, I would be the one going to jail. I dialed Lawrence, my hands shaking with a rage that felt like it was going to liquefy my bones. "They've got an injunction, Lawrence. They're keeping me from the kid." "I know, Milton," Lawrence said, his voice sounding older, more tired. "They're playing the danger to society card. And with Jessica's social media campaign, they're winning the court of public opinion. Judges hate bad press, especially when it involves children. So what? I just sit here while they tell the world I'm a monster. No, Lawrence said. "We go to the source. Silas found something. Remember the black SUV, the FDLE investigation? It turns out Detective Miller wasn't just interested in Jessica's offshore accounts. He was interested in why the bank hasn't foreclosed on David yet, despite him being 4 months behind. And the bank manager, a guy named Marcus Thorne, is Jessica's cousin," Lawrence revealed, "and he's the one who authorized the business loan she forged your name on. He didn't just look the other way. He's in on the whole thing. They've been using your credit score to secure high-interest bridge loans to fund their lifestyle, hoping to pay them off once they seized your estate." I gripped the phone. "So it's a conspiracy. A whole network of them. It's a house of cards, Milton. But right now, you're the one standing in the wind. Stay inside. Don't engage. If you even look at them, they'll call 911, and you'll be in a cell before you can say Marine Corps." I didn't know it yet, but staying inside wasn't going to save me. At high, comple, Amy, a white van pulled into my driveway. 2 men in clinical scrubs got out. They weren't police. They were private transport for a mental health facility. "Mr. Gray?" one of them asked as I stepped onto the porch. He was a mountain of a man, his face void of emotion. "We have an emergency transport order signed by Dr. Raymond Curtis. You're being taken in for a 72-hour involuntary observation." "The Baker Act?" I asked, my blood turning to ice. "Curtis isn't my doctor. He's under investigation." "The order is valid until a judge stays it, sir," the man said, stepping closer. "Don't make this difficult. We have the authority to use restraints if you're non-compliant. And remember, there are cameras everywhere. If you fight us, you're just proving your daughter-in-law right." I looked down the street. I saw David's Mercedes parked at the corner. He wasn't even hiding. He was sitting there, sunglasses on, a smirk on his face as he watched the professionals come to take his father away. He wanted me to swing. He wanted me to roar. He wanted the footage of the violent veteran being subdued. I looked at the big man in the scrubs. I thought about the digital recorder in my pocket. I thought about Chloe. And then, I did something David never expected. I sat down on my porch swing. I crossed my legs. I put my hands behind my head. "I'm not fighting you," I said, my voice echoing off the quiet suburban walls. "I'm perfectly calm. I'll go with you. But I want you to look at that Mercedes at the end of the block. That's the man who paid for this emergency. I hope his check clears, because he's about to be very, very poor." The men looked confused. They expected a struggle. Instead, they got a man who looked like he was going on a vacation. They escorted me to the van, but as they reached for my arms, I stepped back politely. "I can walk," I said. As the van doors slammed shut, I saw David pull away. He thought he'd won. He thought that by putting me in a psych ward for 3 days, he'd have the window he needed to drain the remaining liquid assets before Lawrence could file a stay. What he didn't know was that I had spent the previous night doing more than just looking at a ledger. I had called Rodriguez, David's boss at Prestige Motors. I didn't call to complain. I called to offer him a deal. I told him I knew about the skimming. I told him I had the proof Silas gathered. And I told him that if he fired David immediately and filed a criminal complaint, I'd personally cover the losses David had caused the dealership. Rodriguez had been looking for a reason to cut the cord. I'd given him a golden parachute made of pure spite. While I was being driven to the psych ward, the hammer was falling. David's phone was likely ringing right now, his boss telling him not to bother coming in, and the police waiting at the showroom to talk to him about the missing funds. But as the van pulled into the heavily gated facility, a cold realization hit me. I was in their territory now, Dr. Curtis's territory, and in here, the truth didn't matter. Only the charts did. I was processed in a room that smelled like floor wax and despair. They took my belt, my shoelaces, and most importantly, my digital recorder. "Standard procedure," the orderly said, tossing my only defense into a plastic bin. I was led to a small, windowless room. The door locked with a heavy, mechanical thud. An hour later, the small slot in the door slid open. A tray was pushed through. Beside the lukewarm mystery meat was a small plastic cup containing 2 blue pills. "What are these?" I asked. "Doctor's orders, Mr. Gray. To help with the anxiety." "I don't have anxiety," I said. "Refusal to take medication will be noted as agitation and non-compliance," a voice said over the intercom. "It will extend your stay." I looked at the pills, fast-acting sedatives, the very thing David and Jessica had whispered about in my hallway at Ba. If I took them, I'd be a zombie for the hearing. If I didn't, They'd keep me here until I was. I picked up the cup. I looked at the security camera in the corner. I knew David was probably watching the feed from his phone, somewhere, laughing. To family, I whispered, and I tilted my head back. But as I swallowed the pills, I made sure my hand covered my mouth just enough. I'd spent years in the Marines, learning how to endure. I tucked the pills under my tongue, waited for the orderly to walk away, and then spat them into the drain of the tiny sink. I sat on the edge of the thin mattress, staring at the wall. I had to stay awake. I had to stay sharp. Because tomorrow morning, Lawrence was going to file the motion to vacate the guardianship, and I needed to be ready to speak. But then, the lights in my room flickered and went out. The intercom crackled to life. It wasn't the orderly's voice. It was David. "Hey, Pop," he whispered, his voice distorted by the cheap speaker. "Did you like the pills? Jessica says they're the best money can buy. By the time the judge sees you tomorrow, you won't even remember your own name. And while you're in here playing Marine, I'm at the house. Your house. We found the floor safe, Pop, the one under the rug in the guest room. You really shouldn't have kept the combination in that old ledger." My blood ran cold. The floor safe. It held the original deeds, the physical bonds, and $50,000 in emergency cash. "You won't get away with this, David," I rasped. "I already have," he laughed. "The cops are too busy looking for Jessica's offshore money to care about a few bonds. And by the time you get out of there, the house will be listed, the safe will be empty, and we'll be halfway to Costa Rica. Chloe sends her love, by the way. She thinks you're at a special school because you forgot how to be a grandpa." The intercom cut off. I was trapped in a locked room, in a facility owned by a corrupt doctor, while my son was literally digging the heart out of my home. I leaned my head against the cold cinder block wall. I felt the first real wave of hopelessness wash over me. I had played all my cards. I had been smarter, faster, and more prepared, and yet, here I was, buried alive in a tomb of white tile. I closed my eyes, trying to find a way out, and that's when I heard it. A faint scratching sound. It was coming from the air vent above the sink. "Mr. Gray?" A whisper drifted down. I stood up, my heart leaping. "Elena?" "I don't have much time," the nurse whispered from the other side of the grate. "They're on to me. Curtis found out I spoke to you. He's coming here tonight to sign the permanent commitment papers. He's going to say you tried to attack an orderly." "How do I get out, Elena?" "The back laundry chute," she said. "It leads to the loading dock. I've jammed the sensor, but you have to move now. In 10 minutes they do the night rounds." I looked at the vent. It was small. I was 67, and my joints ached with every movement. But then I thought about David's laugh. I thought about him opening that safe. I thought about Chloe being told I'd forgotten her. The confused old man was officially dead. I stood on the sink, the porcelain groaning under my weight. I gripped the edges of the vent and began to pull. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of that laundry chute. I didn't know if I'd make it to the house in time, but as the vent cover gave way with a sharp crack, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a legal battle anymore. It was a hunt. And I was no longer the prey. The metal edges of the air vent bit into my palms, a sharp, cold reminder that I was still alive and very much a target. I've survived jungle humidity and desert dust, but the claustrophobic crawl through the ductwork of a corrupt psych ward was a different kind of hell. My 67-year-old joints screamed with every inch I gained. I didn't know it yet, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the sight waiting for me back at Sunset Drive. I reached the laundry chute, the vertical drop looking like an endless throat of galvanized steel. I didn't hesitate. I pushed off, sliding through the darkness, the smell of industrial bleach and soiled linens burning my nostrils. I hit the pile of laundry at the bottom with a muffled thump that jarred my teeth. "Milton!" Elena's voice was a frantic hiss in the dimly lit loading dock. She was standing by the back of a service van, clutching a plastic bag. "You're bleeding." I looked down at my arm. A long gash from the vent was weeping blood onto the white hospital gown. I didn't care. "The bag, Elena, please." She handed it to me. Inside were my clothes, my shoes, and my cell phone. She'd managed to swipe them from the intake bin while the orderlies were distracted by a staged incident in the cafeteria. I dressed in the shadows of the loading dock, fumbling with my buttons, my hands shaking not from fear, but from a cold, concentrated fury. "My truck is around the corner," she whispered. "I can't drive you all the way. They'll track the GPS, but I can get you close." "Just get me to the marina," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a different man. I have a backup vehicle there. As we pulled out of the facility, I saw the night shift guard making his rounds. I ducked low in the seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. We cleared the gates just as the sirens started to wail inside the building. They'd found the empty bed. The hunt was on. Elena dropped me 2 blocks from the marina. I didn't thank her. There wasn't time. I ran, my lungs burning, to a small storage unit I'd kept for years. Inside sat a ngin chincham tam Jeep Wrangler, a hobby project David didn't even know existed. I'd spent weekends restoring it, a secret sanctuary from the world. It was loud, it was conspicuous, and it was fast. I tore through the back streets of Clearwater, avoiding the main drags where the patrol cars would be looking for a disoriented elderly escapee. I pulled onto Sunset Drive 10 minutes later, parking 3 houses down in a neighbor's darkened driveway. My house sat bathed in the glow of the street lamps, looking deceptively peaceful. But as I approached, I saw the flicker of flashlights in the upstairs windows. The guest room. I didn't enter through the front door. I knew the floorboards too well. I slipped through the garage, using the manual release I'd greased only a month ago. I moved through the kitchen, my feet silent on the tile. The air in the house felt violated, heavy with the scent of David's expensive cologne and the metallic tang of a forced safe. I reached the doorway of the guest room. David and Jessica were on their knees on the rug, the floorboards pulled back to reveal the steel safe I'd hidden there 15 years ago. The door was swung wide. Is that all of it? Jessica's voice was sharp, brittle. She was holding a stack of bearer bonds, her eyes wide with a feverish greed. There's more, David grunted, his arm submerged in the hole. He pulled out a small velvet box. Martha's jewelry. My breath hitched. He didn't even pause. He popped the lid, looked at the diamonds that had sat on his mother's neck for 30 years, and shoved them into a duffel bag like they were loose change. The deeds, David. Where are the deeds to the beach property? They aren't here, David spat, standing up. His face was flushed, sweat dripping from his chin. The safe is empty. He must have moved them. You said he was senile. You said he wouldn't remember where he put his own shoes. Jessica stood too, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. If we don't have those deeds, Fowler can't finalize the transfer before the state freezes the accounts. We're sitting on a pile of bonds we can't cash without a signature, and a bag of jewelry that'll flag every pawn shop from here to Miami. I'll find them, David growled. I'll tear this house apart if I have to. You don't have time, I said, stepping into the light. The silence that followed was absolute. David dropped the duffel bag, the sound of Martha's jewelry clinking together like broken glass. Jessica shrieked, stumbling back against the wall. Pop? David's voice was a pathetic whimper. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, he saw the Marine, not the bank account. I was covered in dust, blood dried on my arm, my eyes like flint. How? How did you get out? You're supposed to be drugged. I don't like blue pills, David, I said, stepping further into the room. And I don't like vultures in my house. Milton, wait! Jessica tried to scramble for her phone, but I was faster. I swiped it from the nightstand and tossed it into the hallway. You're going to jail, she hissed, her fear turning back into calculated malice. Escaping a mental facility, attacking us. We'll tell the police you broke in. We'll tell them you're having a violent episode. Look at you. You look insane. I might, I said, my voice low and steady. But I'm not the one holding a bag of stolen property, and I'm not the one who forged a bank manager's signature on a fraudulent loan. Jessica's face went pale. What are you talking about? Lawrence found your cousin, Jessica, Marcus Thorne. He's already talking to the FDLE. Turns out, he's not interested in going down for your cosmetic line fantasy. I turned to David, my son, my only child. He looked like a cornered rat, his eyes darting toward the door. You were skimming from the dealership, David. I knew that, but I didn't know it yet. I didn't know that Jessica was skimming from you. David froze. What? Check the duffel bag, David, I said. Check the side pocket. David reached down, his hands trembling. He pulled out a folder I'd seen in Silas's office. It was a set of travel documents, 2 tickets to Zurich, one in the name of Jessica Gray, the other in the name of Dennis Fowler. The betrayal hit David like a physical blow. He looked at the tickets, then at his wife. Jessica, what is this? It's a backup plan, she screamed, her composure finally shattering. You were going to get caught, David. You're sloppy. You're weak. Fowler and I. We were going to make sure the money actually survived. You and Fowler, David's voice rose to a roar. I'm the one who did the work. I'm the one who dealt with the old man. You were sleeping with the lawyer. He's a man with a future, she spat, her eyes full of contempt. You're just a car salesman who can't even pay his own mortgage without Daddy's help. They started screaming at each other, a cacophony of greed and infidelity that filled the room I'd built for guests, for friends, for family. I stood there, watching my son's world implode, and I felt a strange, cold detachment. This was the family I'd been trying to save, a den of snakes biting each other's tails. What happened next changed everything. In the heat of the argument, David lunged for Jessica. He didn't hit her, but he grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Where's the rest of it? The offshore account? Give me the codes. Never, she shrieked. A heavy thump echoed from downstairs. The front door had been kicked in. Clearwater PD, hands in the air. The room was suddenly flooded with tactical lights. Officers in body armor swarmed the hallway. I didn't move. I kept my hands visible, my back straight. Get him. Jessica pointed at me, her voice a piercing needle. He's the one. He escaped the hospital. He's dangerous. He tried to kill us. The officers didn't look at me. They moved past me, pinning David to the floor and slamming Jessica against the wall. David Gray, Jessica Gray. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit grand theft, elder abuse, and multiple counts of financial fraud. What about him? David yelled from the floor, his face pressed into the carpet. He's the crazy one. He's the one who's sick. A man stepped into the room behind the officers. Lawrence. He was holding a stack of papers and looked remarkably calm for someone who had just authorized a police raid on his best friend's house. The Baker Act order was vacated an hour ago, David, Lawrence said, his voice echoing in the small room. Turns out, when the state discovers the signing physician is receiving kickbacks from the petitioner's attorney, they tend to look at the emergency a little differently. Lawrence looked at me, a flash of concern in his eyes, but I gave him a curt nod. I was fine, or as fine as a man can be when his house is filled with handcuffs. The police led them out. David was sobbing now, a pathetic, broken sound that I knew would haunt my dreams for years. Jessica was silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, her mind probably already calculating how to flip on Fowler to save herself. The house went quiet. The blue and red lights continued to pulse against the walls, a rhythmic reminder of the wreckage. I walked over to the hole in the floor and picked up the duffel bag. I pulled out Martha's jewelry box. The velvet was dusty, but the diamonds inside still caught the light. You okay, Milton? Lawrence asked, stepping into the room. I will be, I said, clutching the box to my chest. Is she safe? Chloe, she's with the Hendersons. Gerald's wife is reading her a story. She doesn't know anything happened. I closed my eyes, a wave of relief washing over me. Good. Keep it that way. We got Fowler too, Lawrence added. They picked him up at his office. He had his bags packed. He was 5 minutes away from headed to the airport. The victory was complete. The villains were in chains. The assets were recovered. I should have felt a sense of peace. But as I looked at the forced safe and the empty guest room, I realized the real horror wasn't the theft. The real horror was that I was alone. Lawrence, I said, my voice cracking for the first time, I want to file for permanent guardianship. Of who, Milton? You've already cleared your name. Not of me, I said, looking toward the window. Of Chloe. I want my son and that woman stripped of their parental rights. I want them gone, completely. I want to make sure they never touch a cent of my money, and more importantly, they never touch that little girl again. Milton, that's a hard road. Termination of parental rights is the death penalty of civil law. You sure you want to go that far? They tried to erase me, Lawrence, I said, my eyes turning back to Flint. Now, I'm going to return the favor. I walked out of the room, leaving the safe open and the rug turned back. I didn't know it yet, but the termination wasn't just a legal strategy. It was a trap of my own making, one that would lead to a secret David had been keeping for 6 years, a secret that would make everything I'd discovered tonight look like child's play. As I reached the front porch, Gerald Henderson was waiting for me. He looked at my face, then at the jewelry box in my hand. It's over, Milton, he said. No, Gerald, I replied, looking down the street where the last police cruiser was disappearing. It's just getting started. I need to know who Chloe's biological father really is. Gerald's face went dead white. How did you find out? I didn't, I said. the realization hitting me with the force of a heart attack. But I just did. Gerald stood on my porch, the bag of oranges forgotten in his hand, his eyes darting toward the street where the ghosts of the police sirens still seemed to echo. I've lived next to this man for 12 years. I've seen him preside over the most complicated cases in Pinellas County, with a face made of stone. But in that moment, the stone cracked. He looked like a man who had accidentally let a secret out of a cage, and now that it was wild, he didn't know how to catch it. "How did you find out?" he'd asked. But the truth was, I hadn't known. It was a shot in the dark, a frantic intuition born from the sheer, oily depths of the betrayal I'd witnessed in that guest room. Jessica was a woman who didn't just lie. She lived in a house of mirrors. If she was willing to sleep with the lawyer to secure a getaway, why would I assume the foundation of our family was any more solid? "Gerald," I said, my voice sounding like it was being pulled through broken glass. "Sit down. Tell me everything. If you ever valued Martha's memory, you'll tell me the truth before I find it out the hard way." He sat. The porch swing groaned, a rhythmic, haunting sound in the humid night. He didn't look at me. He looked at his hands, those old, steady hands that had signed 1,000 judgments. "6 years ago," Gerald began, his voice barely a whisper. "When Jessica was pregnant with Chloe, she and David had that big blowout. You remember? She went to Orlando for 3 months. David told you she was resting with her parents. But she wasn't, Milton. She was staying with a friend from law school, a friend named Dennis Fowler. I felt the air leave my lungs. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was turning into liquid. David came to me," Gerald continued, his words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "He was a mess. He knew she was seeing Fowler. He knew the timeline didn't add up. He wanted to file for divorce then, but he was broke. He'd just lost that landscaping business money you gave him. He knew that if he divorced her and the kid wasn't his, you'd probably wash your hands of the whole mess. He was afraid of being cut out of the legacy, Milton. He was more afraid of being poor than he was of being a fool." "And you?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Why didn't you tell me? You were my friend." "I was a judge, Milton. I told David to get a DNA test. I told him to handle it like a man. But then Jessica came back. She had a plan. She told him that if he stayed, if he claimed the child, they could eventually manage your estate together. She convinced him that the child was a golden ticket. And David, he wanted to believe her. Or maybe he just wanted the money that badly. I thought they'd settled it. I thought maybe I was wrong. But then I saw Fowler's name on that guardianship petition last week, and I knew the long game wasn't just about the money. It was about Fowler taking back what was his, using your sweat and blood to pay for it." I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, staring at the darkened street. I didn't know it yet, but the man I was before this moment was officially gone. The Marine had survived the war, but the father had just been executed in cold blood. Chloe wasn't my granddaughter. The little girl who drew me pictures, the one who smelled like sunshine and crayons, was the biological product of the 2 people who had just tried to lobotomize me for my bank account. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the railing. My first instinct, the raw, animal part of me, wanted to call Lawrence and tell him to drop the guardianship. I wanted to pack my bags and burn the house down and never look at that little girl again. But then I remembered the way her small hand felt in mine. I remembered her saying, "You're the king, Grandpa." She was 6. She didn't choose her father. She didn't choose the viper that birthed her. She was the only innocent thing left in this wreckage, and she was being raised by monsters who viewed her as a golden ticket. "What are you going to do, Milton?" Gerald asked. "I'm going to hit rock bottom," I said, "and then I'm going to use it as a foundation." The next morning, I didn't go to the lawyer's office. I didn't go to the bank. I went to the Pinellas County Jail. The visiting room was a bleak, fluorescent-lit cage that smelled of floor wax and regret. I sat behind the plexiglass, waiting. A few minutes later, the door opened and Jessica was let in. She wasn't wearing navy silk anymore. She was wearing a baggy orange jumpsuit that made her look small and sallow. The influencer was gone. Only the predator remained. She picked up the phone, her eyes full of a defiant, jagged heat. "Come to gloat, Milton? Or did you just want to see what a violent veteran looks like in person?" "I'm not here for you, Jessica," I said, my voice dead and cold. "I'm here to tell you how this ends." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "It ends with my lawyer getting me out of here on a technicality. Fowler knows every judge in this county. By the time we're done, You'll be the one under investigation for that escape. Fowler isn't coming for you, I said. Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. What? He's already cut a deal, Jessica. He turned over his files on the offshore accounts in exchange for a reduced sentence. But he didn't just turn over the money. He turned over the travel logs. He's telling the FDLE that the whole scheme was your idea. He's painting you as the mastermind who manipulated a grieving son and a respectable attorney. It was a lie, or at least, a half-truth. I'd coached Lawrence to feed to the press, but I knew Jessica. Her greatest fear wasn't jail. It was being the one who got played. He wouldn't, she hissed, her knuckles whitening on the receiver. He loves me. We have a child together. I didn't blink. I let the silence hang between us, heavy and suffocating. I watched the realization dawn in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to know. I know about Chloe, I said. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She looked around the room, suddenly terrified of the cameras, the guards, the very air. David doesn't know you know, she whispered. David is in a cell 3 blocks away, crying like a child, I said. He's useless to you now, and Fowler has already abandoned you. You're alone, Jessica, and here is the deal. I am going to file for full, permanent custody of Chloe. You are going to sign the papers, voluntarily. You are going to admit to the forgery, the fraud, and the elder abuse in a sworn deposition that clears my name completely. And if you don't, I will spend every penny I have to make sure you never see the sun again. I will hire investigators to dig into every law school exam you ever took, every tax return you ever filed, and every influencer check you ever cashed. I will find the things Fowler didn't tell the police. And when I'm done, you won't just be a felon, you'll be a ghost. I leaned in, my face inches from the glass. But if you sign, I'll make sure the prosecution forgets to mention the offshore money. I'll let you keep enough to hire a halfway decent defense. You'll still go to prison, but you might come out before you're 60. And Chloe, she'll never know the truth. She'll grow up believing her mother made a mistake, not that she was a product of a conspiracy. Jessica stared at me, her chest heaving. For the first time in her life, she had run out of mirrors. She was looking at a man who had nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous person she had ever met. I need to talk to David, she stammered. David is already signing his own confession, I lied. I hadn't even spoken to him yet. He's terrified of being an accomplice to your forgery. He's throwing you under the bus to save his own skin. I saw her heart break not from love, but from the humiliation of being betrayed by someone she considered beneath her. She picked up the pen the guard provided and, with hands that shook like leaves in a storm, she signed the preliminary agreement. I walked out of that jail feeling a strange, hollow coldness. I had the signatures, I had the leverage, but as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized I had one more stop to make, the hardest one. I went to David's cell. If Jessica was a predator, David was a parasite that had run out of a host. He was sitting on the edge of his cot, his head in his hands. When he saw me, he didn't yell, he didn't mock me. He just looked up with eyes that were red and swollen. "Pop," he whispered. "I'm sorry. Things got so out of hand. The debt, the pressure." "I know about Chloe, David," I said. He froze. He didn't ask how. He didn't deny it. He just slumped further, his entire body seemingly shrinking. I thought I could make it work. I thought if I was a good dad, it wouldn't matter whose blood it was. But then Fowler, he kept dangling it over me. He told me that if I didn't go along with the guardianship, he'd tell you everything. He'd tell you I was a cuckold. He'd tell you I wasn't your real legacy. The hidden truth was out. David hadn't just been greedy. He'd been blackmailed by his own wife and her lover. He was a coward who had chosen to destroy his father rather than lose his pride. "You chose wrong, David," I said. "You chose a man who wanted your life over the father who gave it to you." "What happens now?" he asked, looking like a man awaiting the gallows. "You're going to plead guilty," I said. "You're going to take the 5-year deal the DA is offering. You're going to tell the truth about Jessica and Fowler, and then you are going to stay away from us. Forever." "Pop, please. She's my daughter in every way that matters." "She is an innocent child," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "And you are the man who tried to drug her grandfather and steal her future. You aren't a father, David. You're just a warning." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back at the sound of him calling my name. I didn't look back as the heavy steel doors slammed shut. I went home. The house on Sunset Drive was quiet. The hole in the guest room floor was still there, a jagged wound in the wood. I sat in my office and looked at the photo of Martha. I had won. The collapse was complete. My enemies were in jail or headed there. My name was being cleared in the press as Lawrence leaked the truth about the mercenary doctor and the conspiratorial family. I was no longer the violent veteran. I was the survivor of a past. Sinister plot. But as I sat there, I realized that the reversal hadn't just been about the legalities. It was about me. I had become a man who could lie to his son's face to get a signature. I had become a man who could use his granddaughter as a bargaining chip in a prison visitation room. I had survived by becoming exactly as cold as the people who tried to kill me. What happened next changed the course of the rest of my life. I went to the Hendersons to pick up Chloe. She was in the backyard, playing with a golden retriever. When she saw me, she ran to me, screaming with joy. I picked her up and held her so tight it hurt. "Grandpa." "You're back," she cried. "Did you finish the special school?" "I did, sweetheart," I whispered, tears finally stinging my eyes. I learned everything I needed to know. As I walked her back to my house, I saw a black car idling at the curb. It wasn't the police. It wasn't Lawrence. The window rolled down. It was a woman I hadn't seen in 20 years, a woman who looked remarkably like Chloe, only older, sharper, and wearing a suit that cost more than my Jeep. "Milton," she said. "Sarah," I gasped. Sarah was Dennis Fowler's sister, and she was the top investigative journalist for the Miami Herald. "I heard what you did to my brother," she said, her voice like ice. "I heard you put him in a cage, but I didn't know it yet. You didn't just catch a crook, Milton. You stumbled into something much bigger, something my brother was doing for a group of people you really don't want to meet." She looked at Chloe, then back at me. "You think this was just about your $2.8 million?" she asked, a grim smile on her face. "Milton, your son wasn't the target. You weren't even the target. You were just the collateral. The real target is the property under your house." I felt the world tilt again. The revenge was just starting, but the twist was about to rewrite the entire map. "What's under my house, Sarah?" "The reason Fowler was so desperate for those deeds," she said. "The reason your son was willing to kill for them. It's not about the dirt, Milton. It's about what's buried in it from the Motngin Chincham Namuis." I looked at my house, the home I'd loved for 30 years, and for the first time, I felt a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "What's buried there?" "The evidence that will bring down the governor," she said. "And now that you've touched it, they can't let you live." The words Sarah Fowler dropped on my front porch didn't just hang in the air. They felt like they were vibrating, shaking the very foundation of the home I had spent 30 years protecting. I looked down at Chloe, who was currently preoccupied with a stray ladybug on the railing. Her innocence a sharp, painful contrast to the darkness Sarah was inviting into my life. "The governor," I repeated, the name tasting like lead. I thought about the ceremony on the 4th of July, the handshake, the medal, the smiles. It had felt like the pinnacle of my life's recognition. Now, Sarah was telling me it was a mask. "I don't understand. I bought this land in the 90s. It was just a citrus grove and a dilapidated farmhouse." "That's what the public records say, Milton," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum. She stepped closer, the scent of expensive cigarettes and old library books clinging to her. "But Fowler didn't find you by accident. He wasn't just looking for a rich old man. He was looking for this coordinate. Before it was a grove, this was part of the Suncoast Trust holdings. In Motngin Chincham Namuitam, a massive amount of campaign funds and land deeds went missing during the transition of power in Tallahassee. Your house sits directly on top of the old bunker, where the Caldwell family, the governor's family, buried their skeletons, literally and figuratively. I felt a cold sweat prickle my neck. My house on Sunset Drive wasn't just a home. It was a tomb for a political dynasty's secrets. Suddenly, David's desperation, Jessica's cold calculation, and Fowler's obsession with the deeds made a terrifying kind of sense. David wasn't the mastermind. He was just the useful idiot Fowler used to get a legal foot in the door. They didn't want my $2.8 million. That was just the tip they'd leave for the waiter. They wanted what was under the guest room floor. I didn't know it yet, I whispered, more to myself than to her. But the guardianship wasn't the goal. It was the cover. If I'm declared incompetent, the state takes control of my property. They could condemn the house, tear it down, and reclaim whatever is under there without a single eye watching. "Exactly," Sarah said, her eyes flashing with a journalist's hunger. Fowler was supposed to secure the site, but you fought back. You broke the machine, Milton. And now the people who actually own that machine are realizing that a retired Marine with a grudge is sitting on their biggest liability. I looked at Chloe. She looked up at me and smiled, her eyes so much like the woman who had birthed her and the man who had truly fathered her. My heart twisted. I had just spent months fighting to keep her, and now I was realizing that keeping her might be the very thing that gets her killed. "You need to leave, Sarah," I said, my voice hardening into that flat, military tone. "If you're right, this house is about to become a war zone." "I'm not leaving without a story, Milton," she said. "And you're not surviving without a platform. If you disappear now, the governor wins. If we go public, you have a shield." "Not yet," I said. "I need proof. Not just rumors from your brother's files. I need to see it for myself." After Sarah left, promising to stay at a motel under an assumed name, I took Chloe back to the Hendersons. I didn't tell Gerald the truth. I couldn't. I just told him I needed one more night to sanitize the house after the police raid. He looked at me with those wise, tired judge's eyes, and I knew he didn't believe me, but he nodded anyway. I went back to my house. It was nearly midnight. The neighborhood was silent, but for the first time in 30 years, the silence felt predatory. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked into the guest room, the hole in the floor staring back at me like an unblinking eye. I grabbed a sledgehammer from the garage. My joints ached, and my heart was doing that frantic, uneven skip, but I didn't stop. I began to swing. I broke through the concrete slab beneath the floorboards, the vibrations traveling up my arms and into my teeth. It took 2 hours of back-breaking labor before the hammer hit something that didn't sound like stone. It sounded like hollow metal. I cleared the debris with my bare hands, my fingernails tearing, blood mixing with the dust. Beneath the concrete was a heavy, rusted steel hatch. It had no handle, only a reinforced electronic keypad that had long since died. I didn't need a code. I had a pry bar and 30 years of repressed rage. When the hatch finally groaned open, the smell that hit me was ancient stale air, grease, and the metallic tang of old batteries. I lowered myself down with a flashlight. It wasn't a bunker. It was a vault. Inside were rows of filing cabinets, their drawers locked. But on the central table sat a heavy, lead-lined box. I opened it, and my breath stopped. Inside were thousands of pages of original land grants, bank ledgers from the 50s, and most importantly, photographs. Photographs of the current governor's father shaking hands with men in hooded robes. Photographs of illegal transactions that would prove the entire state's infrastructure was built on a foundation of blood and stolen land. I realized then that Fowler had been trying to find these to blackmail the governor. David had just been the crowbar. But as I stood there in the dark, surrounded by the secrets of a dynasty, I heard the faint sound of a car door closing outside. Then another. I didn't know it yet, but my silent work with the sledgehammer hadn't been as quiet as I thought. Or maybe the house was bugged in ways Lawrence's team hadn't found. I climbed out of the hole, my heart hammering. I looked out the front window. 2 black Suburbans were idling at the curb. No sirens, no lights. Just men in tactical gear stepping onto my lawn. These weren't the police. These were the people you don't want to meet. I realized in that moment that my revenge on David and Jessica was child's play. I had been playing checkers while the world around me was playing a lethal game of chess. I had been worried about a $2.8 million estate while I was sitting on a multi-billion-dollar scandal. I grabbed my old service pistol from the safe, the one I'd kept clean and loaded for 30 years, praying I'd never have to use it. I checked the magazine. Full. The front door didn't just open. It exploded off its hinges. I didn't fire. Not yet. I retreated into the kitchen, the shadows my only ally. I heard their footsteps heavy, professional, synchronized. "Mr. Gray," a voice called out. It was a voice I recognized from the 4th of July. Not the governor, but his chief of staff, a man named Sterling. "We know you're in here. And we know what you've found. Let's not make this a tragedy. You're a hero, Milton. We want you to stay a hero." "A hero?" I spat, my voice echoing from the darkness of the pantry. "You mean a corpse that doesn't talk?" "We have David," Sterling said. The world went still. "The jail transfer was intercepted 20 minutes ago," Sterling continued, his voice calm, almost bored. "He's in the car, Milton. He's a pathetic man, but he's still your son. And we have the address of the Hendersons. We know exactly where Chloe is sleeping." I felt a coldness settle over me that was deeper than death. They had the kid. They had the son I had just tried to destroy. The reversal had been flipped on me. I had hit rock bottom, only to find out there was a sub-basement of cruelty I hadn't prepared for. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The box, Milton, and your silence. You give us the contents of that vault, and you sign a non-disclosure agreement that would make a CIA agent blush. In return, David goes back to his cell to serve a quiet 5 years, and Chloe grows up never knowing why her grandfather's house burned down in an accidental gas leak tonight. And if I refuse, then we start with the judge's house," Sterling said. I looked at the pistol in my hand. I could take out 2, maybe 3 of them, but I couldn't stop them all. I couldn't protect Chloe from 5 miles away. I realized then that my revenge plan had been too small. I had been trying to win a legal battle, but I was in a war of attrition. But I wasn't just a retired daycare owner. I was a Marine. And if there's one thing a Marine knows, it's how to use the enemy's overconfidence against them. "The box is in the vault," I said, stepping out of the pantry, my hands raised, the pistol tucked into the small of my back. "I'll show you, but I want to see David first." Sterling nodded to one of the tactical men. A moment later, David was pushed through the shattered front door. He was battered, his lips split, his eyes wide with a terror so profound he couldn't even speak. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a predator or a parasite. I saw a scared little boy who had wandered into a den of wolves. "Pop," he choked out. "It's okay, son," I said, and for the first time I meant it. "I'm going to fix this." I led them to the guest room. I pointed to the hole. "It's down there, on the table." Sterling signaled 2 of his men to go down. As they lowered themselves into the hatch, I felt the digital recorder in my pocket, the one I'd swiped back from the laundry room in the psych ward. It was still on. It had been recording since I stepped onto the porch. Every word Sterling said about the governor, the Hendersons, and the accidental gas leak was being captured. But a recording wouldn't save Chloe right now. I needed something bigger. "You know," I said, leaning against the doorframe as the men grunted below, "this house is older than you think, Sterling. When I bought it, I didn't just grease the manual garage door. I rerouted the old security system, the one linked to the local fire station's emergency silent alarm." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "Am I?" I pulled a small remote from my pocket, the one for the hobby jeep at the marina. I pressed the button. A deafening, high-pitched squeal erupted from the speakers I'd hidden in the vents months ago when David first started lurking. It wasn't an alarm. It was a frequency designed to disrupt digital recording and communication. In the confusion, I moved. I didn't go for the pistol. I went for the gas line behind the guest room wall, the one I'd loosened earlier when I was digging, intending to move the dryer. I kicked it hard, the hiss of natural gas filling the room instantly. "What are you doing?" Sterling screamed, reaching for his sidearm. "I'm ending the guardianship," I said. I grabbed David by the collar and threw him toward the hallway. "Run, David, get to the Hendersons, move!" David didn't hesitate. He scrambled toward the door, his survival instinct finally serving a purpose. I turned back to Sterling. He had his gun leveled at my chest. But the room was thick with gas, and the tactical men were still scrambling out of the vault. "You pull that trigger, and we all go up," I said, my voice calm. "The vault, the secrets, the hero, and the governor's cleanup crew. Is your boss worth dying for?" Sterling hesitated. That split second was all I needed. I lunged at him, not to kill him, but to tackle him toward the window. We crashed through the glass together, landing on the bushes outside just as a spark, maybe from the electronic keypad, maybe from a tactical light, hit the gas. The explosion didn't level the neighborhood, but it blew the back half of my house into the gulf. The vault was buried under tons of burning debris. I lay on the grass, the air knocked out of me, watching the flames lick the Florida sky. Sterling was unconscious beside me. I saw David running down the street, disappearing into the shadows toward the Hendersons. I pulled the digital recorder from my pocket. It was cracked, but the light was still red. I didn't know it yet, but the collapse was complete, but the resolution was going to be televised. I had lost my house. I had lost my son's future. I had almost lost my life. But as the real sirens began to wail in the distance, the ones they couldn't stop, I realized I had finally found the one thing David and Jessica never could. I had found the truth, and I was going to make sure the entire world heard it. The heat from the burning guest room was a living thing, a roaring beast that clawed at my back as I dragged myself across the grass. I could hear the secondary pops of ammunition, or old batteries, exploding in the vault below, a funeral march for a dynasty's secrets. Sterling lay a few feet away, groaning, his expensive suit shredded by glass. I looked at the wreckage of my life's work, the house on Sunset Drive, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. I just felt light. I didn't know it yet, but the fire was the only thing that could truly clean that house. It wasn't just the drywall and the rafters burning. It was the greed, the lies, and the decades of quiet enabling that had led us to this precipice. I felt a pair of hands grab my shoulders. I flinched, reaching for the pistol in the small of my back, but a voice stopped me. A voice that was raw, shaking, and unmistakably broken. "Pop, I've got you. Stay down, I've got you." It was David. He hadn't run to the Hendersons, or rather, he had run, seen Chloe was safe through the window, and turned back. He was covered in soot, his face streaked with tears and grime. He didn't look like a man worried about a bank account. He looked like the boy who used to cry when he fell off his bike, the one who always looked to me to see if he was going to be okay. "You're supposed to be gone, David." I coughed, the smoke burning my throat. "I couldn't leave you again," he whispered, pulling me further onto the lawn as the fire department's sirens finally rounded the corner of Gulf Boulevard. "I've spent my whole life leaving you behind when things got hard. Not tonight." We sat there on the grass, father and son, silhouetted by the orange glow of a $3 million bonfire. Sterling was being swarmed by paramedics and police, but I didn't care about him. I pulled the cracked digital recorder from my pocket and handed it to David. "This is your ticket," I said. "It's a recording of Sterling threatening Chloe. It's the proof that Fowler and Jessica were working with a state-level conspiracy. You give this to the FDLE. You tell them you were a pawn, that you were coerced. You're still going to jail for the skimming and the guardianship fraud, David. I can't stop that. But this keeps you from being the fall guy for a murder-suicide plot." David looked at the small plastic device like it was made of gold. "Why are you helping me, Pop, after everything I did? I tried to erase you." "Because I realized something while I was in that vault," I said, watching the roof of the guest room cave in with a shower of sparks. "I spent my life building a fortress of money and property, thinking it was a legacy. But a legacy isn't something you leave to someone. It's something you leave in them. I failed you long before you betrayed me. I let you think that things were more important than people. Tonight, we both lose the things. Maybe that's the only way we find the people." The resolution came with the cold, clinical speed of a government cleanup. The accidental gas leak narrative didn't last an hour. Not after Lawrence arrived with the backup files I'd secretly uploaded to his cloud server while I was playing with the frequency disruptor. Sarah Fowler, the woman who claimed to be a journalist, was arrested at the airport 2 hours later. She wasn't a reporter. She was a private fixer for the governor's family, sent to retrieve the box and eliminate the witnesses. But I had outplayed her. The documents I'd left in the lead-lined box were high-resolution photocopies. The real files, the photographs, the ledgers, the proof of the Suncoast Trust scandal, had been couriered to a federal judge in Tallahassee by Silas the night I escaped the psych ward. By sunrise, the governor had issued a statement of emergency resignation for personal reasons. By noon, the FBI was raiding the state capitol. What happened next was the only thing I hadn't planned for. 6 months later, I sat on a bench at Clearwater Beach. The air was cool, the tourists were sparse, and the Gulf was a flat, shimmering sheet of turquoise. I didn't have a house on Sunset Drive anymore. The insurance company was still fighting the claim, and the state had seized the land for environmental remediation, a polite way of saying they were still digging up the governor's skeletons. I was living in a modest 2-bedroom condo in Dunedin, funded by what was left of my daycare sale proceeds. David was serving a 4-year sentence at a minimum security facility near Ocala. He wrote to me every week. They weren't letters asking for money or legal help. They were stories about the books he was reading, the garden he was tending in the prison yard, and the man he was trying to become. He'd finally stopped looking for shortcuts. Jessica was gone. She'd cut a deal, testifying against Fowler and Sterling, in exchange for a 10-year sentence in a federal women's prison. She had no visitation rights. She had no offshore accounts. She was exactly what she had always feared being: irrelevant. "Grandpa, look!" I looked up, as Chloe ran toward me, her hair whipping in the wind. She was holding a large, intricate seashell. She sat beside me, her eyes bright and untroubled. She lived with me now. Permanent, legal guardianship. The termination of David and Jessica's rights had been a formality after the criminal convictions. "It's a whelk," I said, taking the shell. "See the spirals? It's been through a lot of storms to get this smooth." "Like you, Grandpa?" she asked, tilting her head. I smiled, a real one that didn't feel heavy. "A lot like me, sweetheart." The final twist, the one that I kept tucked in my heart like a secret treasure, didn't come from a vault or a lawyer. It came from a letter I found in Martha's old jewelry box, the one David had shoved into the duffel bag that night. I hadn't opened the secret compartment in the bottom for years. The letter was dated a week before she died. "Milton," it read, "I know our son. I know he has a hollow place in him where his pride should be. I know you'll want to protect him, but please, protect yourself first. If the day ever comes where he chooses the shadow over the light, let the house go. It was never our home anyway. You were the home, you and that little girl. Don't let the things we built bury the man you are." She had known. She had seen the storm coming years before the first cloud appeared. I looked out at the water and realized that my revenge hadn't been about winning. It hadn't been about the $3 million, or the building, or the public vindication. It had been about the resolution of a life lived for the wrong reasons. I had lost my son to prison, my house to fire, and my fortune to legal fees and restitution. I was a 68-year-old man, with a modest pension, and a used Jeep. By David's old standards, I was a failure. But as Chloe leaned her head against my shoulder and asked if we could go get chocolate ice cream, I knew better. I had saved the only thing that couldn't be appraised. I had saved the future. The moral of the story isn't that the good guy wins. It's that the good guy has to be willing to lose everything to find out what's actually worth keeping. Revenge is a fire that burns the house down, but if you're lucky, it clears the ground for something real to grow. I stood up, took Chloe's hand, and walked away from the beach. I didn't look back at the horizon. I looked at the girl beside me. "Chocolate it is," I said, "and maybe a double scoop. We've got a lot of celebrating to do." "For what, Grandpa?" "For being free," I said, "just plain free."